Pass me the gravy, would you, dear? And try not to spill it on the Persian rug my son worked so hard to pay for." Beatrice sneered, her voice carrying effortlessly over the clinking of crystal wine glasses. Across the long mahogany dining table, 20 sets of eyes darted toward the wife, sitting quietly at the edge of the feast. For 3 agonizing years, Madeline had swallowed the subtle jabs, the outright insults, and the blatant disrespect from her husband's family, all while he stared blankly at his plate. They thought she was a lucky gold digger clinging to their precious boy's wealth. They were about to learn a brutal, unforgiving lesson in property law. Madeline Hayes had always been a woman who believed in building her own foundation. Long before she met Derek, she was grinding out 80-hour weeks as an independent software consultant in Seattle, eventually selling a proprietary algorithm to a major tech conglomerate. At 28, she was quietly, comfortably a millionaire. But Madeline wasn't flashy. She drove a sensible sedan, wore minimalist clothing, and preferred the quiet security of index funds over designer handbags. When she met Derek at a mutual friend's wedding, she was charmed by his easy laughter and apparent ambition. Derek was a mid-level marketing manager, handsome, charismatic, but secretly drowning in insecurity. His previous engagement had ended disastrously when his fiancée left him for a wealthier man, leaving Derek with a fragile ego that shattered at the slightest breeze. Because Madeline loved him, she made a fateful, deeply misguided decision. She decided to shrink herself so Derek could feel tall. A year before their wedding, Madeline found her dream home. It was a stunning, sprawling 1920s Tudor revival in the affluent neighborhood of Oak Ridge, boasting Brazilian cherry hardwood floors, a chef's kitchen draped in Carrara marble, and a sprawling backyard with a heated pool. The asking price was $1.4 million. Madeline bought it entirely in cash. However, to protect her assets, the deed was placed under an LLC she had formed years prior, Bluebird Holdings. When she and Derek moved in, Derek's career had just seen a slight bump, a promotion to a senior management role. It was a modest salary increase, but to Derek's family, it was the crowning achievement of the century. "I can't believe my boy bought this palace," Beatrice, Derek's mother, had shrieked during her first visit, her eyes wide as she ran her manicured fingers over the custom crown molding. "I always knew you were destined for greatness, Derek." Madeline had stood in the doorway, waiting for Derek to correct his mother. She waited for him to say, "Actually, Mum, Maddie bought the house. She's incredibly successful." Instead, Derek puffed out his chest, slipped his hands into his pockets, and offered a modest shrug. "Just wanted to make sure my future wife has a nice roof over her head, Mum. Hard work pays off." Madeline's stomach had plummeted, but she bit her tongue. Later, when she confronted him in the privacy of their master bedroom, Derek had pulled her into a hug, his eyes pleading. "Maddie, please. You know how my family is. My dad always called me a failure. Let them have this. Let me have this. What does it matter whose name they think is on the paper? We're a team." Against her better judgment, Madeline agreed. It was a secret that would become the noose around her neck. Almost immediately, the dynamic was set. Because Beatrice and the rest of the family believed Derek was the sole provider, they treated Madeline like a charity case, a pretty freeloader who had hit the marital jackpot. Every family gathering became a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. "Derek looks so exhausted lately," Beatrice would sigh loudly from the plush living room sofa, sipping tea while Madeline served her. "It's so much pressure for one man to maintain an estate like this. It's a shame you only do that computer gig from home, Madeline. A little supplementary income might take the burden off my son." Madeline's computer gig brought in triple Derek's annual salary, but she merely forced a polite smile. "I help out where I can, Beatrice." Derek's sister, Jessica, was even worse. Jessica was 26, chronically unemployed, and believed the world owed her a living. Whenever she visited, she treated the Oak Ridge house like her personal resort. She would raid Madeline's expensive skincare products, leaving the lids off La Mer creams. She would borrow Madeline's cashmere sweaters and return them smelling of cheap perfume and stale smoke. "Don't be so dramatic, Maddie," Derek would sigh whenever Madeline complained. "Jess is just finding herself. And my mum means well. She's just protective. They're my family. You have to learn to compromise." But compromise, in Derek's dictionary, meant Madeline absorbing every insult while he played the benevolent king of the castle. For 3 years, Madeline endured the snide remarks about her cooking. "Derek deserves a hot, home-cooked roast, not this quinoa nonsense." Her wardrobe, "Are you really wearing that to the country club, dear?" And her perceived laziness. She convinced herself she was keeping the peace. She convinced herself that her marriage was worth the humiliation. She didn't realize that Derek's family didn't just want to visit the castle, they wanted to conquer it. The breaking point began on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Madeline was in her home office, a sunlit room overlooking the garden, wrapping up a critical conference call with a client in Tokyo. When she finally took off her headset and walked into the kitchen, she froze. The foyer was cluttered with dozens of cardboard boxes, 3 oversized suitcases, and a massive, hideous floral armchair that smelled distinctly of mothballs. In the center of the kitchen island, Beatrice was loudly directing Ryan, Derek's younger brother, to carry a television down the hall. "Careful with that, Ryan. That plasma screen is fragile," Beatrice barked, before turning and noticing Madeline. She didn't flinch. "Oh, good. You're done playing on your laptop. Be a dear and make some coffee, will you? We've had a miserable day." Madeline stared at her mother-in-law, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Beatrice? What is all this? Why is Ryan carrying a TV into the guest room?" Derek scurried into the kitchen from the garage, looking distinctly like a deer caught in the headlights. "Maddie. Hey, babe, I was going to text you, but I knew you were on a call." "Derek, what is going on?" Madeline demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. Derek rubbed the back of his neck, refusing to meet her eyes. "So, Mum's landlord decided to sell her rental property out of nowhere. And you know Ryan and Jess still live with her. They had to be out by the 1st of the month, and rent prices are crazy right now. I told them they could crash here for a few weeks until they figure things out." Madeline's vision swam. Crash here? 3 full-grown adults moving into her home without a single word of discussion? Derek, a few weeks? Where are they even going to sleep? "Well," Beatrice interrupted smoothly, pouring herself a glass of Madeline's expensive Pinot Noir. "Ryan will take the basement media room. It's a bit damp, but he'll manage. Jessica is taking your office. She needs a large mirror for her makeup tutorials, and the lighting in there is best. And I will take the east-facing guest room." "My office!" Madeline snapped, turning to Derek. "I work from home, Derek. I need that office. I run my business from there." "Oh, please, Madeline," Jessica scoffed, sauntering into the kitchen with a half-eaten apple. "You send emails in your pajamas. You can do that from the dining room table. I actually need a space to create content." "Derek, a word." "Now," Madeline commanded, turning on her heel and marching into the hallway. Derek followed her, closing the door to the laundry room behind them. Before she could speak, he went on the offensive. "Maddie, please don't do this right now. My mother is practically homeless. My brother and sister have nowhere to go. Are you really going to be this heartless?" "Heartless?" Madeline hissed, her hands shaking. You invited your entire family to move into our home without asking me. You gave away my workspace, the place where I earn my living." "It's my house, too," Derek snapped back, his voice rising, colored with a sudden, ugly defensiveness. "I pay the utility bills. I pay for the groceries. I'm the man of this house, and I have a right to take care of my family when they are in need. You just sit here all day in luxury while I bust my ass at the firm. The least you can do is share." Madeline stared at the man she had married. He wasn't just gaslighting her. He had actually bought into his own lie. He had lived the fantasy of being the wealthy provider for so long that he had genuinely forgotten who signed the deed, who paid the property taxes, and who funded the lifestyle he so brazenly flaunted. "You're right, Derek," Madeline whispered, a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. The love that had kept her silent for 3 years suddenly curdled into something icy and sharp. "You pay the utility bills." "Exactly," Derek sighed, misreading her silence as submission. He stepped forward, softening his tone. "Look, it's just for a month or 2. Just play nice, Maddie. Let Mom arrange things how she likes. Don't cause drama." But the drama had already begun. Over the next 3 weeks, the house in Oak Ridge ceased to be Madeline's sanctuary. It became a hostile occupation. Beatrice completely rearranged the kitchen, throwing away Madeline's imported truffles, saffron, and aged balsamic vinegars because they took up too much space and smelled weird. When Madeline bought replacements, Beatrice berated her for wasting Derek's hard-earned money. Ryan turned the basement, which Madeline had meticulously designed with custom acoustic paneling for a home theater, into a frat house. Empty beer cans and greasy pizza boxes stained the imported velvet sofa. When Madeline asked him to clean it up, Ryan laughed in her face. "Relax, Maddie. Derek said I can use the room. Talk to the boss if you have a problem." Jessica, however, was the ultimate parasite. Displaced from her office, Madeline had set up a small desk in the corner of her bedroom. One afternoon, she walked in to find Jessica casually trying on a pair of Madeline's diamond earrings, a family heirloom from Madeline's late grandmother. "Take those off," Madeline said, her voice shaking with rage. Jessica rolled her eyes, slowly unhooking the clasps. "God, you're so stingy. You don't even wear them. I have a date tonight, and Derek said I could borrow something nice. It's not like you bought them anyway. Derek spoils you too much." Madeline marched over, snatched the earrings from Jessica's hand, and pointed to the door. "Get out of my bedroom." "You know you're a real piece of work," Jessica spat, backing into the hallway. "We all know why you married him. You're just a leech. Wait until Mum tells everyone at the Thanksgiving dinner party about how you treat us in Derek's house." Madeline froze. "Thanksgiving dinner party?" She immediately confronted Derek, who was lounging on the patio. "Derek, what dinner party is Jessica talking about?" Derek winced. "Oh. Yeah, Mum decided she wanted to host a Thanksgiving dinner here next Thursday. She invited Aunt Carol, Uncle Frank, the cousins, about 20 people total. It's a big family reunion. She decided to host a dinner party in our house. And you didn't tell me?" "She's excited, Maddie. She's finally in a house big enough to host the whole family. She's taking care of the cooking and everything. You literally just have to show up and smile. Why do you always have to make everything a fight?" Madeline looked at her husband. She looked at the smudges on the glass patio door left by Ryan, heard the loud, obnoxious reality TV blaring from Jessica's stolen room upstairs, and smelled the heavy, greasy scent of Beatrice frying something in her ruined kitchen. They wanted a show. They wanted a grand audience to put the leech in her place. Madeline felt a slow, terrifying smile stretch across her face. The anger that had been boiling inside her suddenly evaporated, replaced by a chilling, absolute calm. "Okay," Madeline said softly. "Okay, Derek. A dinner party sounds lovely. Let's invite the whole family." The week leading up to Thanksgiving was an exercise in extreme psychological endurance. Madeline moved through her own home like a ghost, observing the hostile takeover with a detached, clinical precision. The anger had burned out, leaving behind a terrifyingly clear resolve. If Derek and his family wanted a show, she was going to give them a blockbuster. On Monday morning, while the rest of the house was sleeping off a late night of drinking Derek's premium scotch, Madeline drove to downtown Seattle to visit her attorney, Richard Sterling. Richard had handled the incorporation of Bluebird Holdings and the subsequent cash purchase of the Oak Ridge property. He was a ruthless, sharply dressed man in his 50s who had advised Madeline against marrying Derek without an ironclad prenuptial agreement. She had ignored him then. She was not going to ignore him now. "I need everything, Richard," Madeline said, sitting in his mahogany-paneled office. "I want certified copies of the deed, the LLC formation documents, proving I am the sole owner of Bluebird Holdings, the bank transfer records from the sale, and the property tax receipts for the last 3 years. Richard raised an eyebrow, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Planning some light reading for the holidays, Madeline?" "You could say that. I also need you to draft formal eviction notices. 30 days to vacate, addressed to Beatrice Hayes, Ryan Hayes, and Jessica Hayes. And draft divorce papers." The words tasted metallic in her mouth, but they didn't hurt. The man she had loved died the moment he had demanded she sacrifice her career for his mother's comfort. "I'll have the documents couriered to a private P.O. box by Wednesday," Richard said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "I told you he was a fragile investment, Maddie." "I'm liquidating the asset," she replied flatly. When Madeline returned to Oak Ridge, the delusion had reached entirely new heights. Beatrice had taken it upon herself to hire a landscaping crew to tear up Madeline's prized Japanese maple in the front yard. "It was blocking the view of the bay window, dear," Beatrice said dismissively when Madeline demanded to know what was happening. Derek agreed it looked messy. "Besides, he's paying for the new rose bushes, so it's really not your concern." Madeline didn't argue. She just went inside and checked the joint checking account, an account she deposited a modest allowance into to keep up appearances, while Derek deposited his entire paycheck. As she suspected, the account was overdrawn. Derek had put the landscaping, the new flat-screen TV, and the upcoming Thanksgiving catering on his credit cards, which were now maxed out. He was drowning himself in debt to play a billionaire, completely oblivious to the fact that his wealthy wife had stopped throwing him life preservers. Later that evening, Derek cornered her in the master bathroom. He looked panicked, his face flushed. "Maddie, hey. Look, the caterers need a final deposit for Thursday. My bank put a fraud alert on my card because of all the holiday spending." He lied smoothly. "Can you transfer $5,000 into the joint account? Just as a loan. I'll pay you back when my end-of-year bonus hits." Madeline looked at him while she brushed her hair. He was sweating. $5,000, Derek, for one dinner. "Mum wanted prime rib and an oyster bar," he muttered, looking at the floor. "Come on, Maddie. It's for family. You have that tech money just sitting there doing nothing. Be a team player. Tech money just sitting there." She mentally calculated the thousands of hours she had coded, the sleepless nights, the relentless grind that had bought the marble tiles he was currently standing on. "Sure, Derek," Madeline smiled gently. "I'll transfer the money tonight. I want everything to be absolutely perfect for your mother." Derek exhaled a massive sigh of relief and kissed her cheek. "You're the best, babe. Seriously. Mum's going to be so impressed." The final nail in the coffin came on Wednesday night. Madeline was walking past the partially open door of the dining room when she heard hushed voices. Beatrice, Jessica, and Derek were huddled around the table, polishing the good silver. "I still don't understand why you let her keep that office," Jessica was complaining. "I need a dedicated studio, Derek. Madeline doesn't even have a real job. She just clicks around on her laptop." "Leave it alone, Jess," Derek sighed. "She's my wife. I have to keep her happy." "You are too good to her," Beatrice tutted. "But Derek, darling, we need to talk about the future. You've built this incredible estate, but you need to think about your blood. Jessica's credit is ruined because of her student loans. I was speaking to Uncle Frank, and he said if you added Jessica to the deed of the house, it would instantly boost her credit score. She could finally get a loan for her boutique." Madeline stopped breathing, pressing her back against the hallway wall. "Mom, I can't just put Jess on the deed," Derek said, sounding uncomfortable, but not dismissive enough. "Why not?" Jessica whined. "It's your house. You bought it. Unless Madeline is pulling your strings. Is she making you keep it all to yourself? I bet she's just waiting to divorce you and take half." "Madeline isn't taking half of anything," Derek snapped, his ego flaring up instantly. "I bought this house. I pay the bills. She doesn't have a claim to it. I'll look into the paperwork, okay? Maybe I can add you as a minority stakeholder or something. Just let me handle it." Madeline walked silently up the stairs, locked herself in the master bedroom, and pulled out the thick manila envelope Richard had couriered to her that morning. She looked at the deed. Bluebird Holdings, LLC. Sole proprietor, Madeline Hayes. Derek couldn't add Jessica to the deed if he tried. He wasn't even on the deed himself. But the fact that he had promised to try, the fact that he had explicitly claimed he bought the house and she had no rights to it, obliterated any remaining shred of guilt Madeline held. Let the feast begin. Thanksgiving Day arrived in Oak Ridge, wrapped in a crisp, golden autumn chill. By 2 p.m, the driveway was crammed with a fleet of cars, including Uncle Frank's massive, rust-spotted RV, which was crushing the newly planted rose bushes Beatrice had so fiercely defended. Inside, the house was a cacophony of entitlement. 22 members of Derek's extended family had descended upon the property like locusts. Aunt Carol was loudly critiquing the drapes in the living room, while her husband, Uncle Frank, was smoking a cigar on the back patio, flicking ashes directly into Madeline's heated pool. Cousin Gregory and his insufferable wife, Penelope, were busy taking selfies in the grand foyer, loudly bragging to their followers about the family estate. Madeline was wearing a simple, elegant navy dress. She had styled her hair, put on her grandmother's diamond earrings, having retrieved them from Jessica's stolen stash, and armed herself with a polite, vacant smile. "Madeline, be a dear, and take Penelope's coat," Beatrice ordered the moment she stepped out of the kitchen. Beatrice was wearing a garish sequined blouse, bustling around like the undisputed lady of the manor. "And fetch us some of that expensive champagne you keep hiding in the wine cellar. The good stuff. We have a lot to celebrate today." Madeline obediently took the coats. She walked to the wine cellar, grabbed 3 bottles of Dom Perignon she had bought to celebrate her company's acquisition, and brought them upstairs. She poured the drinks. She served the hors d'oeuvres. She played the dutiful, invisible servant to absolute perfection, blending into the background as the family heaped adoration onto their golden boy. "I gotta hand it to you, Derek," Uncle Frank boomed, slapping Derek on the back so hard the younger man stumbled. "I always said you were a late bloomer, but buying a spread like this before you hit 35? You hit the big leagues, kid. Marketing must be paying out the nose." "It's just hard work, Uncle Frank," Derek chuckled, sipping his scotch, looking incredibly smug. A lot of late nights. But it's worth it to be able to provide for the family. And such a generous provider, Aunt Carol chimed in, glaring pointedly at Madeline, who was currently picking up discarded napkins. Some men would let a house like this go to their heads. They'd become stingy. But Derek opens his doors to his mother and siblings. That's a real man. It's a shame Madeline doesn't appreciate it more, Jessica whispered loudly to Penelope, making sure her voice carried. She complained for a week straight when Mom moved in. She's so possessive over things she didn't even earn. Madeline continued wiping the counter. Patience, she told herself. Let them dig the hole as deep as it can go. At 6 o'clock, the caterers set up the massive buffet in the dining room. Prime rib, lobster mac and cheese, truffle mashed potatoes, all paid for by Madeline's loan to Derek. The family descended upon the food, piling their plates high and taking their seats at the long mahogany table. There were 22 chairs. Madeline noted, with a sharp spike of dark amusement, that Beatrice had placed her at the very end of the table, half hidden behind a floral centerpiece, right next to the swinging door of the kitchen. Derek, naturally, was seated at the head of the table. Once the plates were mostly cleared and the wine bottles were running low, Beatrice stood up and tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. Family, Beatrice began, dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. I want to make a toast. This has been a difficult year for me, losing my rental home. But God works in mysterious ways. He closed a door, and my beautiful, successful son built me a castle. A chorus of "Hear, hear" echoed around the table. Derek, Beatrice continued, her voice trembling with theatric emotion, you are the patriarch of this family now. You have shown what it means to be a provider. To take the wealth you've earned with your bare hands and share it with your blood. You have given me, Ryan and Jessica, a sanctuary, and we are so proud of you. Derek beamed, his face flushed with wine and unearned pride. He stood up, raising his glass. Thank you, Mom, Derek said. Family is everything. I promised myself years ago that when I made it big, I would never leave you guys behind. This house, it's not just my house, it's our house, our family estate. As long as I'm paying the mortgage, you will always have a roof over your heads. A round of applause broke out. Uncle Frank whistled. Jessica cheered. In fact, Derek continued, riding the high of their adoration, Mom and I were talking, and to prove my commitment to this family, I've decided I'm going to officially add Jessica to the deed of the house next month, just to help her get on her feet. The table erupted into cheers. Jessica shrieked and ran over to hug Derek. Beatrice looked like she might faint from sheer joy. Madeline sat at the end of the table. The smile had vanished from her face. The room was spinning with their cheers, their back-patting, their utter, shameless delusion. She looked at Derek, who was glowing under the validation he had craved his entire life. He had completely detached from reality. He actually believed the lies he was spinning. Madeline reached under her chair and picked up the thick manila envelope she had placed there before the guests arrived. She didn't tap her glass. She didn't shout. She simply stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the Brazilian cherry hardwood floor. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the cheering. One by one, the family turned to look at her. Beatrice's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of deep irritation. Madeline, please sit down, Beatrice hissed. Derek is speaking. No, Beatrice, Madeline said, her voice eerily calm, carrying effortlessly across the silent room. Derek is finished speaking. Now it's my turn. She walked slowly down the length of the table, past Penelope, past Aunt Carol, past Uncle Frank. She stopped right next to Derek, who was staring at her with wide, panicked eyes. He knew that tone. He recognized the terrifying coldness in her gaze. "Maddie, what are you doing?" he whispered frantically. "Not now, please." "Pass me the gravy, would you, dear?" Madeline asked Derek, her voice light, echoing Beatrice's earlier demands. Derek, paralyzed by confusion, didn't move. Madeline ignored the gravy boat. Instead, she dropped the heavy manila envelope onto the center of the table with a loud, authoritative smack. "I have a toast of my own to make," Madeline announced, looking directly at Beatrice. "To Derek, a man so generous he is willing to give away a house he doesn't own." The silence in the dining room became absolute. The air grew thick, suffocating. "What on earth are you blathering about, Madeline?" Beatrice scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. "Are you drunk? You're embarrassing my son." "Am I?" Madeline asked, unfastening the clasp of the envelope. "Because I think Derek has been embarrassing himself for 3 years. He's been telling you all a very entertaining bedtime story about his massive salary, about his hard work, about his mortgage." She pulled out a stack of heavily watermarked, legally certified documents and tossed the first packet toward Beatrice. "Let's start with the facts, shall we?" Madeline's voice cracked like a whip in the quiet room. "Derek makes $85,000 a year, a respectable salary, but certainly not enough to buy a $1.4 million estate in Oak Ridge, and definitely not enough to buy it entirely in cash." Uncle Frank dropped his cigar onto his plate. Jessica stared at Madeline, her mouth hanging open. "Maddie, stop!" Derek suddenly shouted, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. He reached for the documents, but Madeline swatted his hand away with bruising force. "Do not touch me," she commanded, her eyes blazing. She turned back to the stunned audience. "Derek didn't buy this house. He doesn't pay a mortgage, because there is no mortgage. I bought this house. I bought it in cash, with the money I earned from selling my software company, a year before I even married your son." "You're lying!" Jessica shrieked, jumping out of her chair. "Derek told us he bought it. He pays the bills." "Derek pays for the groceries and the internet," Madeline corrected smoothly, sliding another document down the table. "I pay the property taxes, the home insurance, and the maintenance. But you don't have to take my word for it. Look at the deed, Jessica. Read it aloud for the family." Beatrice's hands were shaking as she picked up the certified deed. She put on her reading glasses, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and incredibly frail. "It says the owner is Bluebird Holdings, LLC," Beatrice whispered, confused. "Not Madeline. See? She's lying, Derek. Tell her she's lying." Madeline smiled, a sharp, wolfish grin. She slid the final document across the mahogany wood. "And here are the incorporation papers for Bluebird Holdings, filed in the state of Washington. Sole proprietor and CEO, Madeline Hayes. Me." She leaned over the table, bracing her hands on the wood, staring directly into her husband's terrified, shattered eyes. "You can't add Jessica to the deed, Derek," Madeline whispered, though the entire room could hear every word. "Because your name isn't on it. You are nothing but a guest in my home. And as of right now, your stay is officially over." The dining room, previously warm and vibrating with laughter, plunged into the kind of dead, heavy silence usually reserved for funerals. The only sound was the low, rhythmic humming of the luxury double-door refrigerator in the kitchen. Beatrice's eyes darted frantically across the legal documents, her heavily powdered face turning a sickly shade of grey. She looked at the LLC papers, then at the deed, and finally at her son. "Derek." Beatrice's voice was barely a squeak entirely stripped of its usual imperious command. "Derek, what is this? Tell me this is a prank. Tell me she forged these." Derek stood frozen at the head of the table. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The flush of wine and triumph had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow, small, and terrifyingly young. He looked around the table, at Uncle Frank's deepening scowl, at Aunt Carol's wide-eyed shock, at his sister Jessica, who was clutching her linen napkin like a lifeline. Derek stammered, his eyes pleading as they met Madeline's. "Maddie, please, we can talk about this upstairs. Don't do this in front of everyone." "Don't do what, Derek?" Madeline asked, her voice dangerously even. "Tell the truth? The truth you've been hiding from your family for 3 years, while you let them treat me like a squatter in my own home." "You're a liar!" Jessica suddenly shrieked, slamming her hands on the mahogany table. The crystal wine glasses rattled. She snatched the deed from Beatrice's trembling fingers. "Derek makes 6 figures. He bought this. You're just trying to steal it from him because you know he wants to give me a share." Madeline didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, observing Jessica with cold, clinical pity. "Jessica, you are 26 years old. You don't understand basic property law, let alone corporate structure. Bluebird Holdings was incorporated 5 years ago. I purchased this property 4 years ago. A full year before I even met your brother. He has never paid a single cent toward the principal of this house. Because there is no principal. I paid $1.4 million in cash." A collective gasp echoed around the table. Penelope, Cousin Gregory's wife, covered her mouth with both hands. "Cash?" Uncle Frank boomed, his bushy eyebrows snapping together as he turned a furious glare on Derek. "You told me you got a prime fixed-rate mortgage through a buddy at the bank. You told me you put down 20%. "Frank, please," Aunt Carol hissed, grabbing his arm, but Frank shook her off. "No, I want to hear it from the boy," Frank demanded, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at Derek. "Have you been lying to us this whole time, boy? Playing the big shot while your wife foots the bill?" "It's not like that," Derek cried out, panic finally breaking through his paralysis. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "We're married. What's hers is mine. It's community property, Uncle Frank. We built this life together." Madeline let out a short, sharp laugh that held absolutely no humor. "Community property? Derek, you really should have read the documents Richard sent over when we got married. Assets acquired prior to the marriage, particularly those held within a corporate entity like an LLC, do not magically become yours just because you put a ring on my finger. You own exactly 0% of Oak Ridge." Beatrice slumped back in her chair, pressing a hand to her chest as if her heart were giving out. The grand illusion she had worshipped, the fantasy of her son as a wealthy, successful patriarch who had elevated their family status, was disintegrating before her eyes. "But the bills," Beatrice whispered, staring blankly at the half-eaten prime rib on her plate. "Derek pays the bills. He told me he takes care of you. He said your computer business barely scraped by." Madeline walked slowly back toward her chair at the end of the table, picking up her wine glass. She took a deliberate sip of the Dom Perignon she had bought. "My computer business," Madeline said clearly, "was acquired by a multinational tech conglomerate 2 years ago. I currently consult for them. Last year, I paid more in quarterly estimated taxes than Derek has earned in his entire adult life." She let that sink in. She watched the realization wash over the faces of the 22 guests. The woman they had spent the evening ignoring, belittling, and ordering around was the sole architect of the luxury they were currently drowning in. "As for the bills," Madeline continued, setting her glass down, Derek pays for his car lease, his golf club membership, and the groceries. That's it. And lately, he hasn't even been able to afford that. Which brings me to the second part of my toast. She reached back into the thick manila envelope and pulled out a fresh stack of papers. "Maddie, stop!" Derek lunged forward, rounding the table. "Don't! I'm begging you! We can fix this. I'll make them leave. I'll make Mum and Jess pack up tonight. Just, please, stop! Make them leave?" Jessica gasped, staring at her brother in absolute horror. "Derek, you promised us! You said this was our family home." "Shut up, Jess!" Derek screamed at her, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Just shut up!" The mask had completely fallen. The benevolent, generous brother was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man willing to throw his own family under the bus to save his pride. But it was far too late. Madeline stepped neatly out of Derek's path as he tried to grab the new stack of papers from her hands. She moved with a calm, terrifying grace, walking around the table until she was standing directly behind Beatrice. "You see, Beatrice," Madeline said softly, looking down at her mother-in-law's trembling shoulders. "The real tragedy here isn't just that your son is a liar. It's that he's financially ruined himself trying to impress you." Madeline dropped a piece of paper next to Beatrice's plate. Then she walked to Jessica, dropping another. Finally, she tossed one in front of Ryan, who hadn't spoken a single word since the confrontation began, his face pale and eyes wide. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, her voice hollow. She didn't reach for the paper. She looked at it as if it were a venomous snake. "That is a formal, legally binding 30-day notice of eviction," Madeline stated, her voice ringing out crisp and clear. "Drafted by my attorney, signed and dated. You are legally considered month-to-month tenants, even though you pay no rent. By the 26th of December, you, Jessica, and Ryan will remove yourselves and all your belongings from my property. If you do not, I will have the sheriff remove you for trespassing." "You can't do this!" Jessica screamed, tears of rage finally spilling down her cheeks. "It's Thanksgiving. You're kicking us out on the holidays. You're a monster." "A monster?" Madeline raised an eyebrow. "Jessica, you moved into my home without asking. You stole my office. You stole my grandmother's diamond earrings, which, by the way, I took back from your vanity this morning. You have treated me like dirt on the bottom of your shoe while eating the food I paid for. Speaking of which," Madeline turned to the rest of the silent, horrified guests. "I hope you all enjoyed the prime rib and the oyster bar," Madeline said, her tone conversational, though her eyes were ice. Derek's credit cards were declined when the caterers demanded final payment yesterday. He maxed them out buying a new flat-screen TV for Ryan, landscaping my front yard without my permission, and buying premium scotch to impress Uncle Frank. I transferred $5,000 into our joint account last night so he could pay for this meal. "You're welcome." Uncle Frank slowly pushed his chair back from the table. The scraping sound was deafening. He stood up, tossing his linen napkin onto his half-finished plate. "I've lost my appetite," Frank growled. He looked at Derek with a mixture of profound disgust and pity. "You're a fraud, Derek. You let your wife buy your clothes, pay for your house, and fund your ego, and then you sat there and let your mother insult her. You're no man." "Uncle Frank, wait," Derek pleaded, reaching out a hand. "Don't speak to me," Frank snapped. He turned to Aunt Carol. "Get your coat, Carol. We're leaving." The exodus began. It was immediate and brutal. Cousin Gregory and Penelope quietly stood up, refusing to look at Derek as they hurried toward the foyer. The other aunts, uncles, and cousins followed suit, a silent, deeply embarrassed procession of people desperate to escape the fallout of a nuclear detonation. Within minutes, the grand dining room, previously packed with 22 cheering relatives, was reduced to 5 people: Madeline, Derek, Beatrice, Jessica, and Ryan. The silence that followed the slamming of the heavy oak front door was absolute. Beatrice was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands, the illusion of her golden child thoroughly pulverized. Jessica sat frozen, staring at the eviction notice, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something else. Derek stood in the center of the room, looking around at the empty chairs, the half-eaten food, the shattered remains of his kingdom. He fell to his knees. He actually fell to his knees on the Brazilian cherry hardwood, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with violent, ugly sobs. "Maddie," he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll change. I'll go to therapy. I'll tell them to leave tonight. Please don't throw me away. I love you." Madeline looked down at the man she had married. She searched herself for a spark of sympathy, a flicker of the love that had blinded her for 3 long years. She found absolutely nothing. The well was completely, permanently dry. "I know you love me, Derek," Madeline said softly. "But you loved the reflection I gave you more. You loved the house, the status, the money. You just didn't want to admit that I was the one holding the mirror." She walked over to her chair and picked up the thick manila envelope one last time. She pulled out a sleek, blue legal folder. She walked over to Derek, who looked up at her with red, swollen eyes, hoping for a reprieve. She dropped the blue folder onto the floor in front of him. "Those are divorce papers," Madeline said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You have 30 days to find a new place to live, along with your mother and your siblings. My attorney will be in touch regarding the division of our joint checking account, though considering your credit card debt, I suspect you'll be walking away with negative equity." Derek stared at the blue folder. He didn't reach for it. He just let out a low, guttural wail of absolute defeat. "Now," Madeline said, turning her back on her husband and his weeping family. She walked toward the grand staircase, her head held high, the diamond earrings catching the light of the crystal chandelier. "If you'll excuse me, I have an early morning conference call tomorrow. I suggest you all start packing." The 30 days following the Thanksgiving massacre were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Madeline did not leave the house. Instead, she reclaimed it inch by agonizing inch, enforcing her boundaries with the cold, immovable weight of the law. The dynamic of the Oak Ridge estate had violently flipped. The hostages had become the wardens, and the king had been reduced to a squatter in his own mind. Derek moved into the downstairs guest room, a space previously occupied by Beatrice's mountain of luggage. He spent the first week oscillating between pathetic, weeping apologies slid under Madeline's locked bedroom door, and sudden, desperate outbursts of anger where he accused her of destroying their family over pride. Madeline ignored him entirely. She communicated solely through her attorney, Richard Sterling, who informed Derek's newly hired bargain bin lawyer that any attempt to claim alimony would result in a forensic audit of Derek's spending over the past 3 years. When Derek's lawyer looked into the financials, the reality was stark. Derek had accumulated nearly $82,000 in high-interest credit card debt, all in his own name, to fund the extravagant lifestyle he paraded before his family. Because the debt was incurred recklessly and solely for his personal gratification and gifts to his relatives, none of which benefited the marital estate, Richard successfully argued that Derek was solely responsible for the balance. Derek wasn't just losing the house, he was leaving the marriage financially castrated. Meanwhile, Beatrice, Jessica, and Ryan were forced into a frantic, humiliating scramble. The sheer arrogance that had sustained them evaporated when they realized Uncle Frank and Aunt Carol had completely cut contact, refusing to lend them a dime or offer them a spare room. The family grapevine had already done its work. Derek's fraudulent facade was the laughingstock of the extended family. Jessica, clinging to her delusions, attempted to consult a legal aid clinic, hoping to claim squatters' rights or challenge the eviction notice. She was swiftly informed that a notarized 30-day notice from the sole proprietor of an LLC holding the deed was ironclad. They had no lease, paid no rent, and had no legal leg to stand on. As the December 26th deadline loomed, the atmosphere in the house turned toxic. Beatrice stopped cooking, leaving piles of dirty dishes in the sink, which Madeline promptly bagged up in heavy-duty trash bags and placed on Beatrice's bed. Ryan spent his days sulking in the basement, packing his video games and empty beer bottles in sullen silence. The climax arrived on the morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve. Madeline was sipping her morning espresso in the kitchen when a massive, battered moving truck rattled up the pristine driveway. Derek had finally secured a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a dismal, industrial suburb an hour outside of Seattle. He, his mother, his sister, and his brother were going to share it. Madeline watched from the kitchen island as they began hauling boxes. She had strategically positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the living room, a silent sentinel ensuring they only took what belonged to them. "I hope you're happy, Madeline," Beatrice spat, dragging a suitcase past the kitchen. Her face was haggard, stripped of her usual heavy makeup. "You destroyed a family right before Christmas. You have ice in your veins." "I protected my peace, Beatrice," Madeline replied, not looking up from her tablet. "And I highly suggest you put down that heavy box. You wouldn't want to damage Derek's new television on the way out." About an hour into the move, Madeline heard a sharp, scraping sound coming from the dining room. She walked down the hall and stopped in the doorway. Jessica and Ryan were attempting to unscrew the massive imported crystal chandelier that hung over the mahogany table. On the floor nearby sat a stack of Madeline's expensive copper cookware and a small, framed original oil painting that hung in the guest bathroom. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Madeline asked, her voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Jessica jumped, nearly dropping the screwdriver. "Derek said we could take some things to furnish the new place. This is marital property." "No, it isn't." A new, deep voice echoed from the foyer. Madeline smiled as Richard Sterling walked into the house, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. Madeline had anticipated a petty, vindictive exit. She had hired Richard to supervise the final hours of the eviction, with a police escort on standby to ensure no vandalism or theft occurred. "Officers, these individuals are currently attempting to steal fixtures attached to the property of Bluebird Holdings," Richard stated crisply, adjusting his designer glasses. "Miss Hayes, I advise you to put the screwdriver down immediately, unless you'd like to spend Christmas Eve in county jail for grand larceny." Jessica burst into hysterical tears, dropping the tool as if it burned her. Derek came sprinting in from the garage, his face pale with panic. "Officers, we were just leaving," Derek cried, stepping between his sister and the police. "It was a misunderstanding. We don't want any trouble." "Then I suggest you accelerate your departure, Mr. Hayes," Richard said smoothly. "You have exactly 1 hour before the locks are changed. Anything left inside this house will be considered abandoned property and disposed of at my client's discretion." The final hour was a blur of panicked rushing. Beatrice wept openly as she shoved her remaining clothes into garbage bags. Ryan hauled the last of his cheap furniture into the truck, keeping his head down. Jessica refused to look at Madeline, her face flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and lingering entitlement. At exactly noon, Derek stood by the front door. He held a small cardboard box containing his electric razor, a few framed photos of his college buddies, and the cheap cologne he wore when they first met. He looked around the sweeping grand foyer, at the Brazilian cherry floors, the custom molding, and finally, at the woman who had built it all. "Maddie," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. "Is this really it? 3 years and it just ends like this?" Madeline stood beside Richard, her arms crossed. She looked at the man who had traded her dignity for his family's applause. "It ended the day you let them move in, Derek," Madeline said softly. "You just didn't notice until the applause stopped. Goodbye." Derek swallowed hard, tears welling in his eyes. He turned around, walked out the heavy oak door, and stepped into the freezing December air. Richard stepped forward and firmly pulled the door shut. The heavy click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the vast, empty house. For the first time in over a month, the Oak Ridge estate was entirely, blissfully silent. There was no blaring reality television, no passive-aggressive sighs from the living room, no smell of cheap cigarettes on the patio. Madeline walked into the kitchen, poured the remainder of her espresso down the sink, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The air felt clean. The cage had been unlocked, not by a prince, but by the woman who owned the castle all along. Madeline's story is a stark, brutal testament to the dangers of shrinking oneself to accommodate another person's fragile ego. For 3 years, she allowed her husband to weaponize her wealth to build a false reality, enduring relentless humiliation from a family that viewed her as a parasite while actively feeding off her success. The Thanksgiving dinner party served as the ultimate catalyst, transforming her silent suffering into a masterstroke of legal and emotional retribution. By leveraging the indisputable facts of property law, Madeline didn't just expose Derek's financial ruin and pathological lies, she dismantled the entire parasitic ecosystem his family had built around him. Ultimately, the empty, quiet halls of the Oak Ridge estate became a symbol of her hard-won liberation. She realized that true security doesn't come from keeping the peace in a marriage built on deception, but from fiercely defending the foundation you built with your own 2 hands.